Well, good afternoon, Christ United Methodist Church, friends and family, and anybody who might be hearing my voice through social media or the audio recordings or wherever else you might be hearing this. I'm glad to be able to meet with you for our upper room devotional. It's a good one tonight. It brings us to something that's a question that many of us would struggle with. I know I've struggled with it throughout my life, even as a child, all the way up until now. Who am I? What does that mean? When somebody asks you, who are you, how are you going to answer that question? And that's what's at the heart. The author of our devotional tonight, Alice Murray from Florida, she's remembering having to put a cover letter together so that she could get a job that she really wanted. And so you got to put together this letter, an introduction, so to speak. And at the heart of one of those letters is that question of who am I? We want to say the best that we know about ourselves, and we want to make sure that in that setting of introducing ourselves to somebody that we stand apart. I can't tell you how many times I wrote a cover letter on a resume trying to get a better job over the years and spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's that most important thing I could say about me. Oftentimes it came down to me realizing that we're far more complex as individuals than we imagine. I can sit here and say, hey, my name is Jeremiah, and I'm a pastor, and that tells you something about me. I could tell you I've been married for over 20 years and that I have 4 children, and that tells you something more about me, that I'm a husband, that I'm a father, that I'm a pastor, that I'm male. That's clear, you can see that. The beard gives it away, I think, but ultimately, those things are just roles and titles. They define pieces of me, aspects of me, but they don't tell you that I'm a Detroit Lions fan, that I was born in Michigan. They don't tell you that I'm also a brother or a son myself. And so I have all these other complicated titles that define me. And each one of them is a part of who I am. And I'm very much each of these things, but none of them define me. In fact, the totality of these things defines me. And I didn't even get into all the other things about my college level of education or the differences that I experienced because I was born a white male versus a black male, or because I was born a male instead of a female. There's differences in each of our experiences that shape a great deal of who we are and what our lived experience is in our society. And so how do you say, who am I? And yet, I think there's a simplified answer to that as well, that goes beyond the titles that we have that this world would assign us. And that's, we're followers of Christ. We're people who are committed to Christ's kingdom way, His will on earth as it is in heaven. You see, at the heart of what I think it means to say, hey, I'm a Christian, is to say that I'm following Christ now. And it's no longer my will, but Christ's will in me, that I am living out in the world, and that my entire time that I spend in Scripture or in devotional or in service in community, that I hope that on the cover of what they see for me isn't Jeremiah, but instead that you and anybody who see me sees Christ within me. That when they look at me, they would see Jesus. What an honor and a humbling experience to kind of really consider what that might mean. To say, I am Christ in the world. What's that mean if you take that to a really, really in-depth level? What's that mean driving home, or as you're listening to this, that you are Christ in the world? How would Christ live and act or move in the environment you find yourself in? How would He move if He showed up at your church, or if He showed up in my office here, or if He showed up at your home, or if He was sitting there with you in the car as you were driving home? What might happen as you drive by your neighbor on the side of the road who might be holding a sign? Do you see that person differently because Jesus is with you? Or when somebody cuts you off in the car as you're driving, Jesus is sitting there with you. Do you behave any differently? Or when your spouse or your family is not as it should be, how do you respond if Jesus is there in your home? To each other, to your neighbors, to those you encounter. How do you think about yourself if Jesus is sitting right there? I mean, you get what I'm saying here. Like, we change who we are when we think about our best self wrapped up, knit together with God. Because it's who we are. It shapes our identity. In saying that we are Christian, that we follow the Christ way, isn't some exclusive title to being holy or pious. Rather, being called a Christian is a response and a call to service and sacrifice, laying ourselves down for others so that when they see us, they see Jesus. Or they look at us and they know God's love for them. That's a hard ask. And it's something that Paul, in all of his letters, is trying to get those in the early churches that he is leading or has started or is writing to from prison as he is sacrificing and struggling himself as a Christ way follower. He's trying to get each and every one of them to understand that same thing. As they're arguing and backbiting with each other or debating about who has more role and power and status in the local church, as they're discussing how best to behave in the world, Paul is trying to remind them of this simple thing. As they're struggling to find identity as new Christ way followers in response to what Paul has done, they've forgotten that their identity is Christ. They tried to start the Roman church or the church in Corinth, which is where our scripture text today looks at, and arguing in Corinth about whose way of following Christ is the right way or the best way, dividing amongst themselves over Christ. Yet their identity is Christ. It's something that we as United Methodists practice with Open Table, where everyone's welcome to come to communion. And when we look at the communion elements of bread of life and cup of salvation, what we say is that all are welcome at this table. That God's kingdom is more than just something we do a remembrance of by eating bread and sharing of cup. Rather, our celebration of this communion is a celebration of the end of division, the end of race and class and gender and ethnicity, the end of political divisions, whatever they may be, and the end of whatever ideas that we have as humans that divide us. Because when we partake of that bread of life and that cup of salvation, the idea is that we become Christ in the world, that we literally take on the life of Christ ourselves by participating in the bread that is his body and the cup that is his blood. His body and blood becomes our body and blood. It's deeply, deeply symbolic, and yet also deeply mysterious on how that happens, how in the act of doing that we are changed somehow. The act of aligning ourselves with Christ, not limiting it just to bread and cup and the participation of that, just saying, I am Christ in the world, how that gets into us, makes us one with each other, one in ministry to all the world, one with the church and all the saints that have come before and all of those who are struggling here and now to work it out, to struggle through difficult times, generation after generation. And each of us have a universal response, a unifying image that is generation after generation of people seeking to represent and represent Christ, covering them. Not I, but Christ that comes before you. If I say anything tonight that you hear that speaks to you, it's not because of what Jeremiah has done or said. It's because the Holy Spirit has moved between ourselves and has taken what Paul has called dumb preaching or dumb words from me and made them resonate with you in some way, to have hope or a belief that there's something more to this life than the death that is promised each and every one of us. It's a beautiful thing that we are offered in Christ, to throw away ourselves and to be remade in the image of Christ ourselves, to be Christ for the world. And that's what the idea of this author, Alice, she gives us the devotional titled Living Cover Letter, and she's talking and playing off of 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 3, which reads, "You show that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts." The analogy here that Alice is plugging into is that our lives, who we are, how we live and act in the world, how we fulfill those roles of mother or father, husband, brother, nephew, uncle, pastor, or whatever work that you do, that each one of these is a place for people to see us and yet get a glimpse of Christ, to know that somehow I am different because of Christ in me, and that speaks to each of us in a way that is incredibly beyond understanding. You see, the gospel, the good news is that God loves you. Loves you enough that he would sacrifice himself, take on flesh, come down from heaven, become Christ in the world for each of us, so that he could exemplify how it is to live in such a sacrificial way that you die for those that you love. You die for those principles. You stand without fear in the face of life's threats. And you never back out on love. You never back down on truth. And you live without fear, without need of self-preservation, but instead to preserve the image of Christ above all else that represents God's love. That's the example that we've each been given. That's a freedom from this world. We do not need to worry. That's the other end of this, as Paul writes in Corinthians, since it's not us but Christ that goes, we can be bold. We don't have to be afraid. And remember, I was talking about Jesus with us. Well, how differently would we share our love if Christ was sitting right there? Knowing that we are in the image of Christ, and when we go and do what we do, frees us from the fear that we could have. How could we be fearful when the Creator of the universe resides with us, is showing us how to love and to recreate the love he gave in new ways, fresh every day, in every context across this globe? It's a beautiful thing. And so the idea of a cover letter in this scripture speaks volumes as we try to say, well, who am I? What's my identity? Well, our identity is knit together and woven together with Christ in God's love. If we call ourselves those who are responding to Christ as Christ way followers, or Christians for the more nomenclature term, but those who are trying to be Christ in the world, one with Christ, are Christ in the world. It's a huge responsibility, but it's so freeing. And when people look at us, will they see that, or will they see something else? So let's look at what Alice has to say. Again, it's Living Cover Letter for June 29th. I struggled to write a cover letter to accompany an article I was submitting to a magazine. The editor required the letter as a way of introducing myself, but did listing facts such as my educational background, job experiences, and previous publications allow the editor to really know me? He would know about me from reading my letter, but knowing about me is not the same as knowing me. Only by spending time with me, listening to my words, and observing my actions would the editor really know who I am. Christians are living cover letters for Christ. Every day we write a letter for those around us to read. We can tell others about Christ by listing various facts. He was a great teacher, he healed the sick, and he was crucified and raised to new life. But knowing things about Christ does not mean that we know who he is. As living cover letters, Christians convey who Christ is. Then others may come to know Christ by spending time with us and observing our earthly reflection of our heavenly Savior. Will those we encounter come to know Christ by our living letter? You know, the idea that you're a living letter, that people are reading you, is kind of a scary thought. You know, all eyes on you. You're just kind of, wait a minute, everybody's watching. And you know what? There's some truth to that. I can't tell you how many times people stand out in a crowd based on the actions that they take. As you look at the heartwarming YouTube videos that go viral, and it's of somebody helping a homeless man with no expectation, or it's of an unexpected person, you least expect it, maybe the homeless person giving money to somebody else who's undercover as a homeless person. Just seeing the generosity, the Christ-like behavior of undercover bosses who do incredible things as they look to improve their companies, or people just looking in the world and encounter somebody who just meets them on the road and journey of life and has a kind word or a smile or a presence that says, hey, I see you, you're important. Alice is trying to write to this editor. She wants her article to be published, yet she has to introduce herself in some way, and that's kind of a daunting task. Who am I? And more importantly, she points out how important it is that you can't really get to know somebody unless you meet them, unless you see them face to face. You engage with them. There's something incredibly important about presence, the facial features and the in-person feelings that we get from eye contact. And we know that better now than ever before as we're in Corona time, still sheltering in place all over the place and trying to keep safe behind masks. And we realize how much is limited when we can't see all the little micro features of people's faces when we're communicating. You know, humans have been growing together in relationship for thousands of years, learning to read the subtlest things. Sincerity when somebody looks at you, or just the touch of somebody's hand is comforting you. And I think we're all starting to appreciate those things a little bit more, when not that long ago it might have been something most of us would run from. Like, don't give me hugs. You know, I'm a hugger, but you know, there's lots of different ways we've responded, and in the absence of those things, you start to miss them. It's incredible to me. And it's because we are a presence to each other. We need each other. As much as we think we don't, we are somehow made more full in community. And that's because we are representatives and representing Christ in our lives. We have the light of Christ within each of us, God's love within each of us as divine daughters and sons of God. When we interact with our neighbor, we're interacting with the divine. Now, we don't always behave or live up to that. That's why Paul's writing these letters to Corinth and Rome, and because people who are divine daughters and sons aren't behaving as such. And he gets into that all the time about our human weakness and our frailty. Yet, the best of what we are can also be realized. That they're both true. So often we look at people and we try and label them as who they are or what they are based on their race, their class, their gender, as we started our talk today. But to recognize that we are so much more than any of those things. And so many of us are Christ way followers, living and struggling the best way we know how in our time and place. And so if we start with that as an identity, we start looking at people as divine daughters and sons of God, we start with that imago Dei, that image of Christ, that image of the divine within each of us. And it becomes so much easier to hear people who are different speak, because we can still remember that they are representing God themselves to each and every one of us, and that which we disagree with is just as holy as those we agree with. That we all are entitled to respect and the recognition that our differences do shape how we live and act and respond in the world. It's not something we need to avoid. It is true that in this case, we are saying essentially we are all God's children, or that all lives are important. But I will remind each of us that hear my voice tonight that yes, that is true. That's the overarching umbrella thing. Yes, that's true. But yes, our differences shape how we live in the world. I've had to experience a lot of different things because I'm a male. I speak with my female friends and neighbors, and they worry about and think about very different things than I do as a white male. And the same goes for color or race or anything else. These things do shape how we live and experience in the world. They do become a cover letter themselves that we can't hide from. And so hopefully what we can take from this is to realize that if we are those who seek to be Christ way followers, that supersedes it all. That we are Christ in the world first and foremost, regardless of all the other differences we can imagine. And we haven't imagined them all. We're going to continue as human beings to seek out differences and define things and label things, because that's what we do. And yet we also, at our best, agree that we're all God's children. We're all part of God's creation, and we're all entitled to dignity and respect. And when that's taken from one, it's taken from each of us. So I hope that in our responses in the world, in our families, and how we look at politics and uncertainty and fear and all the things in our life, how we look at doing our jobs and managing the resources that God has entrusted us each with, that we look at it as if Christ was sitting there right with us saying, okay, let's budget our finances together. Let's manage this household together. Let's raise our children together. just as if Christ was raising the kids with you, or just as if Christ was sitting there with you deciding how much to pay to help charity, to support your local churches, to do what's necessary. How much are you giving back of your time and your presence and your gifts, not just opening your wallet, but in doing what Christ would have you do? And not just in church attendance on Sunday. No, where are you showing up Monday through Saturday? Where is Jesus showing up in you? That's the question for each of us to struggle with day in and day out, as those who seek to say, Christ is Lord in our lives. What does that really mean? And are you a cover letter? Do people look at you and see him? Or do they see something else? I hope that what you hope in your heart is that they see Christ and not you. What a beautiful thought if we all looked at each other and saw Christ. Let's pray. God, we ask that you would help us each to just live into the truth of your love sown in each and every one of us, your grace given for each and every one of us, and your love that is available for all of us, freely, without expectation. Yet we as human beings divide so frequently. We argue over the simplest things. We elevate tradition over response, and we oftentimes get stuck in trying to figure out what's most fair. Yet it's your love that has spoke across generations, that is exceedingly radical, that goes beyond what any of us deserve. And yet you see us as worthy of being your daughters and sons. So help us, all who hear my voice, and even those who are not hearing my voice, help all in this world to see our beauty and our worth wrapped up in you. Help our world to find peace. Help our nations to govern well. Help those who are treating the sick to know that they are treating Christ. And help us who are available to share all we have with our neighbors, so that when people look at us, they would see your love wherever they look. In this hurting and broken world, it's the best thing any of us could do who proclaim to know your love. Give us your peace this day and for the remainder of this week, as we each seek to represent and represent your love. In your holy and grace-filled name we each pray. Amen. Rest well, or have a great day, or wherever you're hearing this. Know that I pray with and for our community, for you and for our church, and that I'm available anytime. Just hit me up on Facebook or wherever you can. I'm only a phone call away. My information's pretty public. With that, be blessed. Good night.